The morning air in the Rocky Mountains was sharp and clean when Nora Whitmore stood alone in the main hall of her retreat, gently arranging wildflowers in a tall glass vase. Purple and white petals caught the sunlight pouring through the white windows, filling the space with warmth and calm. This place was her sanctuary. After decades of being overlooked, dismissed, and used, Nora had finally built a life where silence felt safe instead of lonely. At 61, she had learned how to breathe again. The women who lived at the retreat were in town for their weekly counseling sessions. The kitchens were quiet, the hallways empty. Nora welcomed these rare hours of stillness. Then she heard it, the low, unfamiliar growl of an engine climbing the narrow mountain road. Her hands froze. No one was scheduled to arrive. The sound grew louder, sharper, cutting through the peace like a warning. Nora stepped toward the window and felt her chest tighten. A sleek black SUV came into view and stopped near the front steps. She knew that car. Years had passed since she last saw it, but her body remembered everything. The doors slammed shut. Footsteps crossed the gravel, one heavy and slow, the other fast and impatient. Nora did not need to look to know who it was. Ethan Whitmore, her son. And Julia, his wife. The doorbell rang, its soft chime echoing through the hall. Normally, that sound meant frightened women seeking safety. Today, it announced the people who had wounded her the most. Nora took a steady breath and opened the door. Ethan stood tall and polished, his expression unreadable, his eyes cold, just like his father's. Julia stood beside him, flawless and tense, a designer handbag hanging from her arm like proof of success. "We heard you moved to a luxury place in the mountains," Julia said with a tight smile. "We came to live with you. To make peace." Before Nora could answer, Julia brushed past her and stepped inside. Ethan followed, rolling two large suitcases across the threshold. "Don't just stand there, Mom," he said sharply. "Help us with the bags." Nora didn't argue. She stepped aside and let them enter. She wanted them to see everything. The wooden floors echoed as they walked deeper into the building. The air smelled of fresh bread and flowers, not wealth, not marble, not control. When they reached the main hall, they stopped suddenly. Both of them stared at the far wall. Dozens of framed photographs covered it from floor to ceiling. Not family portraits. Not childhood memories. Something else entirely. Nora stood behind them, watching their expressions shift from confusion to discomfort. And in that moment, she knew, everything she had buried for years was about to surface. Ethan and Julia stood frozen in front of the wall, their eyes scanning the framed photographs as if trying to make sense of something that refused to fit their expectations. The glass reflected their faces faintly, but what stared back at them from the wall were strangers, dozens of women, all different ages, all captured in moments of quiet strength. There was not a single photo of Ethan as a child. No birthday cakes. No holiday dinners. No smiling family memories. Only unfamiliar faces. Nora Whitmore watched from behind them, her heart steady, her mind clear. She had waited years for this moment, not in anger, but in truth. "This place is not what you think it is," Nora said calmly. Julia crossed her arms. "Then what is it supposed to be, Nora? A hobby? A face?" Nora stepped forward slowly, positioning herself beside the wall. "My whole life, people believe I existed to be useful," she said. "I raised a son alone after a difficult marriage. I worked double shifts at the hospital. I paid bills, solved problems, fixed everything." She paused, and smiled when no one ever asked how I was doing. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. When you stopped calling unless you needed something, Nora continued, when every conversation became about what I could give you, I finally understood something. She turned to face him. I had spent decades being strong for people who did not value me. She gestured toward the white windows, where pine trees stretched endlessly toward the sky. I didn't come to the mountains for luxury. I came here to breathe. Julia let out a sharp laugh. So this is what you turned into. A charity project. Nora didn't flinch. I turned my life into something that matters. She walked closer to the photographs. These women are not guests. They live here. They cook together. They work together. They heal together. Ethan frowned. You never told me about this. You never asked, Nora replied quietly. You visited when it was convenient. You called when you needed something. You never once asked what I was building. Julia rolled her eyes. We thought you were finally enjoying yourself. I am, Nora said softly. Just not in the way you imagined. She folded her hands. Everything you see here was paid for with my own savings. No investors. No sponsors. Just years of work and sacrifice. Ethan stared at her. Then why did Mrs. Delgado say you were rich? Nora almost smiled. Because people confuse peace with money. She reached out and gently touched one of the frames. And you haven't even seen the most important part yet. This is Sophia, she said. She arrived here 2 years ago with a newborn and nowhere to sleep. Her family turned her away because she refused to return to the man who hurt her. She moved her hand to the next photo. This is Evelyn. Her own children took her retirement savings and left her in a nursing home she couldn't afford. Another frame. And this is Clara. She spent 20 years as a school principal before her husband convinced her she was worthless. Ethan shook his head. What does any of this have to do with us? Nora met his eyes. Everything. Ethan let out a slow breath, his frustration finally breaking through. I still don't understand, he said. You're surrounding yourself with strangers instead of your own family. Nora Whitmore turned toward him, her expression calm but unshakable. They are not strangers, she said. They are my daughters. The words landed heavily in the room. Julia laughed, sharp and dismissive. That's ridiculous. You didn't give birth to them. Nora met her gaze without hesitation. I may not have given birth to them, but I chose them, and they chose me. She gestured toward the photographs lining the wall. They call me when they're afraid. They come to me when they have good news. They ask my advice when they feel lost. Her voice softened. When was the last time you did that, Ethan? Ethan looked away. Julia crossed her arms. So now you're replacing your real family with damaged women. Nora shook her head slowly. I'm not replacing anyone. I'm building something real. She pointed to Sophia's picture, smiling as she held her baby. That child has never gone to bed hungry since she came here. Sophia now works at the local clinic and saves for her own place. She pointed to Evelyn tending the garden. That woman grows food that feeds this entire community. Then Clara, standing at a chalkboard with younger women listening closely. She teaches others how to survive. They're not broken, Nora said. They're rebuilding. Julia scoffed. It sounds like an emotional cult. No, Nora replied evenly. It's a family that actually shows up for each other. She stepped closer to Ethan. You are my son. But you walked away from me long before I ever walked away from you. Julia laughed bitterly. So this is where your money went. A group of broken women who need you to feel important. Nora didn't raise her voice. They don't need me to feel important. They need me because they are healing. And I need them because they remind me what love looks like. Ethan stepped forward. You could have spent that money on something better. Something for your real family. These women are my real family, Nora replied. Julia's eyes narrowed. So you'd choose them over us? Nora nodded. Every day. Ethan raised his voice. You're letting them use you. They don't use me, Nora said firmly. They contribute. They work. They respect me. She paused, then added quietly, you never did. Silence filled the room. Julia broke it with a scoff. You're being dramatic. No, Nora said calmly. I'm being honest. She turned toward them fully. You came here after years of silence and judgment. You walked into my home and insulted the people I love. You don't see them as humans. You see them as failures. Ethan looked down. You wanted status, Nora continued. Comfort. Control. But this place is built on something you don't understand. She placed her hand against the wall. Dignity. The weight of her words pressed down on the room. Outside, footsteps could be heard approaching. Voices. Laughter. The women were coming back from town. Nora looked at Ethan and Julia one last time. Before they walked through that door, she said quietly, you need to decide what kind of people you are. The front door opened. And the truth walked in with them. The front door opened and the sound of voices filled the hall. Laughter echoed softly, warm and unguarded. Sophia stepped inside first, her young daughter balanced on her hip, a loaf of fresh bread tucked under her arm. Her face lit up when she saw Nora Whitmore. We brought fresh bread, Sophia said cheerfully. She stopped when she noticed Ethan and Julia standing near the wall. Oh, I'm sorry, she said gently. I didn't know you had visitors. Ethan barely glanced at her. He leaned toward Julia and muttered, so this is one of them. Julia smirked. One of the burdens. Sophia froze. The words hit her like a slap. Her grip tightened around her child. Nora turned sharply. Ethan, she warned. But he didn't stop. My mother has built her life around women who can't even take care of themselves, he said loudly. It's pathetic. The room went silent. Sophia's eyes filled with hurt, but she pulled her daughter closer without saying a word. That was when Evelyn stepped forward. At 70, she was small but steady, her posture strong from years of standing her ground. You will not speak to her like that, she said firmly. Julia scoffed. And who are you supposed to be? Someone who belongs here, Evelyn replied without hesitation. Clara joined her, standing shoulder to shoulder. These women work harder than anyone you've ever known, she said calmly. Ethan laughed bitterly. You're all just using my mother. Nora stepped forward, her voice quiet but unbreakable. No, she said. You are the one who came here expecting to be taken care of. Julia's face twisted with anger. This place is insane. You're surrounded by damaged people. Nora looked around the room, at Sophia holding her child, at Evelyn standing tall, at Clara watching carefully. I'm surrounded by survivors, Nora said. She turned back to Ethan. You just humiliated a young mother who rebuilt her life from nothing. That tells me exactly who you are. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Nora raised her hand. Enough. Her voice was steady. Final. The women moved closer, forming a quiet line beside her. No one shouted. No one threatened. They simply stood, present, united, unafraid. That was the moment Ethan and Julia realized something had shifted. They were no longer in control. Nora looked at them both, her expression calm and resolved. "Get your bags," she said. Ethan blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Nora replied. "Leave. Now." Julia laughed nervously. "You can't be serious." "I am," Nora said. "You insulted the people I love. You walked into my home like it was something you could take." Ethan clenched his fists. "You're choosing them over me." "I'm choosing respect," Nora said. "I'm choosing peace." Julia grabbed her purse. "You'll regret this." Nora shook her head gently. "No. I finally stopped regretting." Ethan looked at the women standing beside her. "They'll leave you too." Nora smiled softly. "They already stayed." The sound of suitcases rolling echoed through the hall as Ethan and Julia turned toward the door. And when it closed behind them, the room felt lighter. When the front door closed behind Ethan and Julia, no one spoke. The silence that filled the hall was not heavy, it was calm. Nora Whitmore stood still for a moment, listening to the echo fade, letting the truth settle into her bones. Then Sophia stepped forward. She didn't say anything at first. She simply reached out and took Nora's hand. Her grip was warm, steady, grateful. Evelyn and Clara moved closer, standing beside them. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They didn't need to. The storm had passed. The family remained. Life at the retreat returned to its rhythm, but something had shifted. The air felt lighter. The women worked with renewed purpose, as if the boundary Nora had drawn belonged to all of them. Weeks turned into months. The gardens expanded first. What had once been small planting beds became long rows of vegetables and herbs stretching across the hillside. The women worked side by side at sunrise, their laughter carrying across the valley. Food was no longer just nourishment, it was independence. Sophia grew into herself. The young woman who once arrived trembling with fear now walked with quiet confidence. She took a job at the local clinic, starting part-time, then full-time. In the evenings, she studied while her daughter slept nearby, dreaming of a future that once felt impossible. Evelyn took control of the retreat's finances. With patience and sharp focus, she taught the women how to budget, how to save, how to protect what they earned. For the first time in years, she felt useful, not exploited, not forgotten, but valued. Clara began leading weekly workshops. She taught practical skills, yes, but more importantly, she taught confidence. She showed women how to speak without apologizing, how to stand without shrinking, how to believe their voices mattered. And Nora watched it all with quiet pride. This was never about rescuing anyone. It was about rebuilding together. One afternoon, Nora received a message from a neighbor in town. "Your place is changing lives," it read. "Women are stronger because of what you built." Nora smiled softly and set the phone down. She didn't think about Ethan often. When she did, there was no anger left, only clarity. Some people choose comfort over growth. Control over connection. She had chosen differently. The retreat continued to grow. More women arrived, some frightened, some angry, some exhausted, but all willing to be honest. Each one came with nothing but a question: is it too late to start again? And every time, Nora gave the same answer. No. Not here. One evening, As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Nora stood on the porch watching the women share a meal together. Children ran through the grass. Conversations overlapped. Laughter echoed freely. This was not the life Ethan had wanted for her. But it was the life she had earned. And nothing, not guilt, not blood, not the past, could take it away. 2 years passed. The retreat Nora Whitmore had built with her own hands no longer looked like the fragile beginning it once was. Where there had been 6 small cabins, there were now 12. The garden stretched farther across the hillside, feeding not only the women who lived there but families in the nearby town. The place breathed life. Sophia was no longer the frightened young mother who had arrived with nothing. She was a licensed nurse now, working full-time at the local clinic. Her daughter ran freely across the grass, laughing without fear, never knowing the weight her mother once carried. Evelyn managed the retreat's finances with quiet authority. She taught women how to recognize manipulation, how to protect their savings, how to trust themselves again. Many arrived believing it was too late to learn. Evelyn proved them wrong. Clara trained new residents, guiding them through the first difficult weeks. She showed them how to rebuild confidence step by step. Strength isn't loud, she often said. It's consistent. Nora watched all of it unfold, grateful and at peace. Then one morning, her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her pause. Ethan. She sat down slowly and opened the message. He wrote that he was in therapy. That his marriage to Julia had ended. That business had collapsed under debt and poor choices. He wrote that he finally understood what he had lost. I'm sorry, the message said. I see now what you were trying to build. I hope someday we can talk. Nora read the message twice. There was no anger in her chest. No urge to respond. No need to explain herself one last time. She understood something Ethan still didn't. Closure does not always require conversation. Nora deleted the message. Not out of cruelty. Not out of revenge. Out of peace. Later that day, a young woman arrived at the retreat. She stood nervously at the door, holding a small backpack and a folded note. I was told to come here, she said quietly. By someone named Sophia. Nora smiled and welcomed her inside. The note was short. Tell Nora Whitmore thank you. She saved my life. Nora folded the paper carefully and placed it in her pocket. She didn't need praise. The work spoke for itself. As evening settled over the mountains, Nora walked through the retreat. She passed cabins glowing with warm light. She heard laughter from the kitchen. She saw women planning futures that once felt unreachable. This was the boundary she had chosen. Not punishment. Not bitterness. Freedom. Ethan had come looking for control and security. He had left with nothing. Nora had stayed with everything that mattered. And for the first time in her life, she knew without doubt, she had chosen correctly. People often think revenge means watching someone else suffer. Nora Whitmore had once believed that too. But standing on the porch of her mountain retreat, listening to laughter drift through the air, she understood the truth. The real victory was building a life no one could destroy. The retreat had become more than a place. It was a living promise. A promise that broken things could be rebuilt. That discarded people could matter again. That family was not defined by blood, but by presence. Women arrive every month now. Some with shaking hands. Some with guarded eyes. Some with nothing but a name and a story they were afraid to tell. Each one asked the same question in a different way. Is it really possible to start over? And every time, Nora answered the same. Yes. Right here. She watched as Sophia helped the new mother settle into one of the cabins, her daughter proudly showing the woman the garden she called home. Evelyn walked past with a clipboard, calmly explaining finances to two residents who had never been trusted with money before. Clara stood beneath a tree, teaching a small group of women how to speak with confidence, how to hold their shoulders back, how to take up space. This was family. Not perfect. Not quiet. But real. Ethan and Julia had come looking for money and control. They had expected comfort without contribution. They had mistaken kindness for weakness. They left with nothing. Nora stayed with purpose. She stayed with people who respected her boundaries. People who asked instead of demanded. People who showed up, not when it was convenient, but when it mattered. One afternoon, Nora received a handwritten letter from a woman who had stayed at the retreat years earlier. It read, "You taught me that love doesn't hurt, control isn't care, and strength doesn't need permission. I have a home now. A job. A life. Thank you for choosing yourself so the rest of us could learn how." Nora folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box she kept in her room. It was full of notes just like it. Not trophies. Reminders. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Nora stood among the women during dinner. No speeches were made. No announcements given. They didn't need them. They belonged. Nora Whitmore had once given everything to people who only took. She had been made to feel selfish for wanting peace. Cold for setting boundaries. Wrong for choosing herself. But she was none of those things. She was free. Family, she learned, is not who shares your blood. It is who respects your boundaries. It is who stands with you when you are vulnerable. It is who gives without trying to take something back. Nora built a life rooted in dignity, truth, and quiet strength. And that was the kind of justice no one could ever take from her.